Hi guys, it's me Nigel, and today I'm going to be ranking every single race of the 2021 Formula 1 season. I'm not going to rank it from worst to best. I'm going to use a tier list that a YouTuber called Aarava uses. He's a very good YouTuber, you should go and check him out. But yeah, I'm going to use his template. This is going to be based on my opinion on how I felt when watching the race and how entertaining it was. Just before doing this, I rewatched all the race highlights just to refresh my memory on what was a 22 race season. So yeah, it was quite long, but yeah, so to start things off, we have Bahrain. It was actually a very good race to start off the season. And, you know, there was a lot of anticipation, especially after qualifying and testing. And it all started with Nikia Mazepin becoming a meme, Ocon hitting Vettel, and Perez having a charge through the field after his car broke down. And Yuki Tsunoda, I think he scored his first points in that race. And the main highlight was Hamilton versus Verstappen. It gave us a glimpse of what was going to be for this championship. They had a great battle, but Hamilton ultimately won. But overall, I put this race in a great watch. Next, we have Imola, and what a crazy race it was. It was a wet race, and everybody loves a wet race. Max and Lewis fight in the first lap, with Verstappen pushing him wide and taking the lead. A lot of drivers spin out. Lewis made one of his first mistakes of the season by going off the track and breaking his front wing. Russell and Bottas came together, causing a lot of drama since at that point both were fighting for the Mercedes seat for 2022, and we know who has it now. Lewis had a great charge up the field and finished P2. Lando and McLaren got their first podium of the season. It was a crazy race, hence why I'm putting it in biblical. Round 3 was Portugal, and from what I remember, it was quite a boring race. Nothing really happened from what I remember. All I remember was, well, if you actually watched it, you could actually see the result happening. Lewis inevitably won. It was all about tyre strategy. Even though Bottas was on pole, Verstappen overtook him, got P2. Bottas came P3. And there were some moves up the field, but nothing really, exciting happened, to be honest. It was not as like, last year's Portuguese GP, I mean, with the whole lap 1 with Carlos Sainz taking the lead for a little bit and Kimi Raikkonen pulling miracles. I think at one point Perez was leading, but that was because Red Bull made him stay out longer with his first set of tyres. So obviously his tyres were pretty much dead, and even though he's good at looking after his tyres, the other drivers overtook him. It was common sense. But yeah, overall I give this a meh ranking. Now, Spain was actually a decent race, which is quite surprising because usually it's one of the most boring races of the season. But, there was a fight in the front with Verstappen and Hamilton, with Max making that huge lunge into the first corner and Hamilton avoiding, a collision. But like Portugal, it was more about tyre strategy, and Hamilton overtook Verstappen and eventually won the race. But yeah, there wasn't really nothing else I could really think about other than, Charles Leclerc making that, overtaking Bottas on the first lap and getting P3, but he didn't get the podium at the end. But yeah, overall it's been better than what we've had in recent years, hence why I'm going to rate it decent. Now, round 5 was Monaco, and despite having a kind of unique podium, it was very boring, as expected, because it is virtually impossible to overtake in Monaco. And really, it was all about qualifying, which was the main highlight of the weekend, as Charles binned it at the end of quali and got pole, but suffered a gearbox failure during the warm-up lap. I was kind of sad because I really wanted to see him win a race, but it is what it is. The only overtake that happened during the race was by Vettel, but then the TV director cut it to Lance Stroll going off the track, which became a meme. However, this race gave Max the lead in the championship since Hamilton finished 7th. So yeah, not much action, but it did change the championship a little. So I'm going to put this in the meh tier. Also, Valtteri Bottas got the longest pit stop of all time. Now, Azerbaijan was a crazy race. It all started in qualifying where there were so many red flags, people going off, and then Leclerc somehow got pole again, which was kind of amazing. This race was kind of a slow burner, I think most of the drama and action happened at the second half, where Stroll got a puncher, and then Verstappen, who was leading a Red Bull 1-2, got a puncher. Then you had the whole red flag, and then it was pretty much a 2-lap sprint. Then you had the whole red flag restart, which was a 2-lap sprint. Hamilton accidentally switches on a button, which switches off his front brakes, and yeah, he goes off the track, which becomes one of the most iconic moments of the season. Perez wins the race. Vettel second, Gasly third, an absolute unexpected podium. I'm gonna rate this race a great to watch. Some people might argue it should be on biblical, but most of the action and drama happened at the second half. So yeah. Now the French GP was perhaps the best French GP we've had, because it's usually a shit race, but you know, Verstappen making a mistake at the start gave Hamilton the lead, but then Red Bull were very smart with their tyre strategy. So Verstappen overtook Hamilton on the second to last lap, then Perez overtook Bottas as well. And you know, I think this race, I'm going to rank it decent. You know, it wasn't, you know, it's hugely dramatic, but I think this was I think it was pretty good, so I'm going to put it in decent. Now, the two Austrian Grand Prix were just Max Verstappen masterclass. He dominated both races. I mean, the reason why there was one more Austrian Grand Prix is because Canada was removed off the calendar because of COVID. But yeah, both races were relatively the same, the only difference being the second one had Lando Norris on the podium. So I'm going to rate both as decent. Now, the British GP was a very controversial race and stirred up a lot of drama between Max and Lewis, and this is where both fan bases and both drivers were very divided at this point, and this is pretty much where it started. And this was also the first race that included a sprint race. The sprint race itself was quite boring, but the actual GP was insane. And like, I'm going to say this right now, I missed out the first lap live. Basically, I went to the gym and I had really poor time management, time. Then by the time I got home, lap 1 had ended, there was a red flag. My brother told me that Hamilton and Verstappen came together. I was absolutely shocked. I thought Hamilton was out, but then I saw he was completely fine. And you know, that man is so immune to DNFs. But this race, I think before the crash even happened, Hamilton and Verstappen had a really good battle. And yeah, thankfully Max walked away fine from that accident. It was only precautionary checks. But yeah, Hamilton got a 10-second penalty, which he served, but won the race still. And also, Charles Leclerc is my star driver, in my opinion, for that race, because he performed miracles in that Ferrari. He put it in a place where it shouldn't be. Hamilton eventually caught up with him on the second to last lap and overtook him for the race win. But yeah, I think this race was very exciting, controversy, and I think this was like the first time we saw the team bosses getting very angry, and this is where Christine Horner got his nickname, Karen Horner. But yeah, and if I'm going to be honest, I'm going to rate this a biblical. You know, this race was very good, and it stirred up a lot of debates, a lot of controversy, and this is where the rival between Hamilton and Verstappen started to get very heated. Next up, we have Hungary, and in my opinion, it was perhaps the best race of the season. A lot of chaos, a lot of drama. It was a wet race. Bottas made a mistake and went bowling. Lance Stroll decided to take out some drivers as well. And then he had the restart, Hamilton starting by himself. And at that point, this meant that anyone could win the Grand Prix, because the next lap after, Hamilton went into pit and fell back to last. And yeah, it was a good battle to see Esteban Ocon versus Vettel. But the main highlight was Alonso versus Hamilton. Alonso, who was in such an inferior car, held up Lewis for 5 laps so he doesn't catch up with Ocon to steal the win. And bearing in mind these two were old rivals, Alonso made his car as wide as possible to not let Hamilton pass him, and so that Ocon will have a better chance at winning the Grand Prix, which he did. Ocon won his first Grand Prix, Alpine won their first Grand Prix, Vettel was on the podium again, but then was later disqualified because Aston Martin didn't fuel his car enough and he had an inefficient amount of fuel. But Hamilton went from last place to 3rd. But yeah, this race was very good to watch and perhaps one of the best Formula 1 races I've ever seen. So I'm going to put it in biblical. Now, the Belgian Grand Prix, this isn't a race in my eyes. You know, it was just 2 nuts behind the safety car before it got cancelled. The main highlight was qualifying, where George Russell put on P2 in a Williams. He performed miracles. Now, as much as it is going to sound controversial, I feel like he did get lucky by getting that podium. You know, the race didn't happen. He didn't need to race to get the podium. But the most disgraceful thing was by F1 for not refunding the tickets for the people who went there, who had to wait 4 hours in the rain just for the race to not happen. So I'm going to put in the I fell asleep tier. Now, the Dutch Grand Prix was quite underwhelming in my opinion, but you know, I feel like it was just like Austria and Styria, or you can call them Austria 1 and 2, but it was just Max Verstappen domination. It was the tyre strategy that kind of made it interesting, with Lewis trying to put some pressure. And then, you know, Max eventually won at his home race. There's a load of orange by the crowd, and Mercedes pitting Bottas for fresh tyres near the end of the race and telling him not to do the fastest lap, which I kind of felt was a bit weird. They should have pit Lewis instead. I mean, they did after Bottas did set the fastest lap. But yeah, overall I'll give this race a decent rating. The Italian Grand Prix was another crazy race like the year prior to it. Daniel Ricciardo seized the opportunity when he started on the front row and took the lead, especially in a season where he was being absolutely destroyed by Lando Norris. And then it was a McLaren 1-2. Max Verstappen decided to take an interesting line by going over the top of Lewis. And yeah, this gave McLaren their first race win since the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix, and Ricciardo his first race win since the 2018 Monaco Grand Prix. Now, even though Ferrari didn't win at their home race, Ricciardo is half Italian, so I guess that kind of counts. But yeah, overall I have to give this race a biblical rating. The Russian GP was an amazing race to watch, and ironically so, since it usually produces one of the most boring races in the year. But you know, with the qualifying being crazy, Lando Norris on pole, Sainz second, Russell third, Lewis Hamilton had a poor qualifying by spinning. And yeah, the race start was amazing. Carlos Sainz overtook Norris and took the lead, and he was leading for a little bit, but his tyres started to die off. Lando led for the majority of the race, and I feel like if it didn't rain, he would have most likely won. He had the pace, but then it started raining, and then you had the whole thing where he was battling with Lewis for the final few laps. And then when it started raining, Lewis is a god in the wet, so when he pitted in first and Lando didn't listen to his team, I was like, okay, Lando's gonna lose this race, and which he did. He spun off the track. Lewis won his race, and this became his 100th win in Formula 1. And overall, I'm just going to rate this race as biblical, merely because there was a battle for the lead. There was absolute chaos and unpredictability. Like, I genuinely thought Lando was going to win. He had the pace until it started raining. But I guess it would have been kind of cool to see a second McLaren race win in a row. But, you know, it is what it is. Lewis, this was pretty much his redemption after the qualifying, and has the experience. Plus, Lando will learn from this race in case, you know, he gets into the same situation in the future. Next up, we have Turkey, and it was literally a Bottas redemption race, especially with the spinning fest he did in 2020. This race wasn't as biblical as prior, but it was still a good one to watch, with the main highlights being Hamilton versus Perez, which was a really spicy fight, and the fact that it was wet made the tyre strategies interesting. I'm going to rate this as a great watch, and also to mention the Red Bulls had a sick looking livery for that weekend. The USA was an alright race, nothing crazy happened other than the first lap where Max tried to cover from Lewis alongside Sainz and the two McLarens going 3 wide. It almost looked like as if they were going to crash. It was more about tyre strategy, which Max and Red Bull did well and held back from Lewis in the closing stages, which was kind of intense. So overall I'm going to give it a decent rating. The Mexican Grand Prix was like the USA. Nothing crazy happened except the first lap being the climactic part, with Ricciardo forgetting how to brake and clipping Bottas. This was a runaway win for Verstappen, and Checo trying to catch up with Hamilton on the closing stages was quite interesting, but overall I'd rank it as meh. The Brazilian Grand Prix was a big comeback for Lewis Hamilton, especially with him being sent to the back for the sprint race after a DRS infringement and being disqualified from qualifying. The sprint race itself was the best out of the 3 we had this season. Alongside that, Lewis coming up the field was a great performance by him, and to win the Grand Prix as well made it one of his best performances in Formula 1. We had Max trying his hardest to defend from Lewis, and ultimately the speed of the Mercedes got the better of him. We had some good battles in the midfield, so if I had to rank this, I'll put it in biblical. Next is Qatar, and to be fair, I thought it'd be a boring race since the circuit was built for motorbike racing. However, it was pretty good, not overwhelming, you know what I mean. Lewis just dominated, and watching Max climb back into P2 after a grid penalty was good to see. Then we had some tyre punches because the curbs on the circuit are legit spike strips. The biggest highlight of this race was Fernando Alonso getting on the podium for the first time since 2014. Which was a nice thing to see. Overall, I'm going to put this race in the decent tier. Also, I just want to say I'm going to put the Dutch Grand Prix in meh instead. Like, I was quite indecisive in putting it either in the decent or meh tier. But after some thinking, I'm going to put it in the meh tier instead, because it was quite a mediocre race in my opinion. The second to last race in Saudi Arabia was absolutely crazy. Like, for the first 17 laps, it was quite clean. Then you had Mick hitting the wall, causing a red flag. And afterwards, we got that crazy restart, which caused another red flag. Then you had Max on the second restart making that dive down the inside to take the lead. Afterwards, you had Max pushing Lewis off the track to defend his position. And within the same lap, they both came together. It was literally insane. I thought at some point they were both going to take each other out. Alongside that, we had so many yellow flags, and plus on the final straight, Bottas stole the podium from Ocon. It was genuinely an insane race. I'm going to put it in the biblical tier, and as a result of the finishing order of that race, it made Max and Lewis tied on points for the finale. Now, the last race of the season in Abu Dhabi had a lot of hype and anticipation since both title contenders were level on points. It was either Lewis taking his 8th title or Max getting his first. The race itself was actually pretty good. I think the start where Hamilton took the lead and Max made the lunge at the chicane was quite exciting. Then you had the whole thing where Checo became the Mexican Minister of Defense. And afterwards, the race kind of became a slow burner with Hamilton extending his lead in the race. But at the same time, I felt like something would happen. And it did, with Latifi hitting the barriers, causing the safety car to come out. The whole thing resulted into a last lap showdown. And in terms of a finale, I feel like it was the perfect ending for the season. Like, I remember when I watched it live, I was on the edge of my seat, not knowing what the outcome would be. That last lap was genuinely amazing to watch, and alongside the context of the championship, it makes it better. And I have to praise David Croft. He actually did an absolute stellar job with the commentary. And, you know, overall, I have to put this race in biblical. Now, I'm not saying it's biblical because Max won and Lewis lost. No, I'm just basing this whole thing off entertainment value. I just believe the race was exciting to watch, especially at the end. I also know there's a lot of controversy surrounding that race, but I think what the race director did was a mistake by not letting the lapped cars unlap themselves at first. But he tried to correct it by breaking some rules. I think what they wanted was for the season to end under racing conditions, and to be fair, it would have been quite underwhelming if the season itself ended under a safety car. So yeah, that's my opinion on that, and there you have it. That's my tier list done. And from it alone, you can see there was a lot of biblical races this season, a lot of memorable races, and I think 2021 has been, well, was, because we're in 2022 now, was perhaps one of the best seasons of Formula 1 we've had in a long time, from start to finish. Despite the controversial end, I still enjoyed it. It was an honour to watch it. And like I said in the beginning, shout out to Aarava, who made this tier list. He's a very good F1 YouTuber, and I'll put the link for the tier list in the description below. Other than that, if you did enjoy, you can subscribe if you want, you can like the video. But yeah, I'll see you guys later. Bye.